There's a question there about tattoos. The thing is, look, with tattoos, there is I think there's some difference of opinion. It's not much. I've heard that there's some, I think, within the Maliki madhab, I think Zannati, and I think even Qarafi slightly, and where they said they felt it may have been makruh and not haram. But I think in general the ulama didn't recognize it as, and they felt it was haram. But the thing is, tattoos, I don't know, that's a tricky one. I think it's a lengthy one, which we haven't really got too much time for right now. But I think in general, there was an interesting, some interesting points made about why tattoos traditionally were actually used. That tattoos today are for kind of like, I mean, actually, even today they're kind of used as a kind of affiliation, but they're used for things like, generally for kind of like an adornment, like beauty. So people want to kind of, or to mark themselves in a particular way. How traditionally tattoos were used to brand cattle and slaves. This was one point which was interesting. And that nobody is a slave except to Allah. So there was this understanding. Although slavery, did exist, and in mind, and the way I've explained this before is Islam did set out through trajectory hermeneutics to rule this out. But anyway, another thing that tattoos were used for was to, one, it was to brand people. Two, it was used to kind of mutate and disfigure people. And it was done in or you belong to this set of people and now you must be known as these people because you carry their mark. See, so tattoos weren't the way they're perceived today. The question then is that how, okay, will that have changed now that it's become an issue of beauty? I don't know, you see, and historically, because it wasn't like this, none of the ulama fought too hard about it. One thing we know is several tribes historically, like certain Berber tribes and so on, for centuries and centuries always had tattoos. The ulama didn't actually go so mad about them and didn't really condemn them or didn't really do anything, just recognized it as their way, that it was this particular tribe, and they just, so it opened a lot of questions. Some Malikiya saw that it was makruh and not haram, but the majority of the people didn't feel a need to discuss it otherwise, and therefore they left it as haram. Tattoos in general, people feel are forbidden, but some of the Malikiya have differed with that, and they felt it's only makruh and not haram. Qarafi has an interesting comment on that. And he's quoted by Sheikh Abu Hassan al-Adawi in his Hashia on the Risala, where he quotes Qarafi as well, stating that, look, it doesn't, he says, I only saw the he says, I only saw the Hanafiya and the Malikiya, the Shafi'iyya and the Malikiya giving their reasons for these haram things in this hadith to be, the famous hadith with the woman who changes herself, who plucks her eyebrows and so on. He says that I found that to be the justification that the Malikis and the Shafi'is gave was that deception and fraud. But he said, I found that not really to make sense. And he said, and it definitely didn't make sense with tattoos. And as to changing the creation of Allah, he said, well, if it's for beautification, then how can that be included? Because trimming the nails, cutting the hair, removing hair around the private parts, stuff like this, he said, is all also changing the creation of Allah. So he said that, and he includes in that circumcision. So if you weren't allowed to change the creation of Allah, why do guys only, okay? So not down with we don't agree with the female circumcision, but guys only. Why do people circumcise? Are they not changing the creation of Allah? If that argument applies, if Allah wanted us to be like that, He could have created us circumcised. So the point is, every time people, so what Qarafi is saying here is that not everything is a kind of not every alteration is negative. So when people freak out all the time, oh my God, pluck the eyebrows, oh my God, creation, changing the creation of Allah. Well, if she looks like this, like Cyclops, like one eye, right? So then I think not changing, I think plucking that is having mercy on the creation of Allah. Why do you want to freak everybody out, for God's sake? So, hell yeah, pluck those eyebrows. And there's a transmission from Aisha. She said that if the daughters of, she said Abdurrahman, meaning her family and so on, had kind of facial hair that was slightly excessive, she would have removed it, but they didn't. And you have to remember something, that the Prophet ﷺ, his people, the Arabs, especially of that time, were not a kind of hairy people. Tattoos, I have highlighted before that, look, although yes, there are those hadiths where the Prophet ﷺ cursed people, but certain ulama from the school of Medina, from the Maliki madhab, did say that they understood them not to be haram. Okay, and this is the way that Imam Al-Qarafi kind of bears that way, and some other people as well. People like Ibn Zayyat, and there's other Malikis, and this is why you see a lot of the kind of Berber tribe women in the Maghrib. They would, a lot of them would have these little tattoos and stuff like this. But there is, I have explained in much detail, look, you have to understand that the whole backdrop to tattoos, and that is that tattoos originally, yep, the Amazigh, yep, you're right, absolutely, Robin. Historically, tattoos were not a fashion statement. So in the time of the Prophet, tattoos were things to brand people or cattle, and you either the branding took place either with slaves to say he or she is my property, or with animals to say that is my property. So it was done as a kind of a brand. It wasn't done as a fashion statement. So it's very important to understand the context in which the Prophet spoke when he said these things were haram. Now, and it stayed like that throughout a huge part of human history. This is why all tattoos were done as tribal, kind of like as an act of tribal solidarity. That we are this tribe, we will have certain tattoos. Marks, but those tattoos were not fashion tattoos. So somebody having, I don't know, a picture of a small rose or things like this, these kind of things were not generally done. I'm not saying nobody may have done them, but this was not how the world did things with tattoos. Some of the Berber women that did have tattoos, or in Pakistan, you see even today the elderly women, and maybe from, like, I would feel like my grandmother's era, they used to have small kind of tattoos, sometimes on their chin and things like this, and sometimes on their hands, a few marks and things like this. These things were done just as kind of play, and to kind of, they might have been seen as maybe an act of beauty, but they weren't really beautiful, the tattoos. Not saying that about my grandma. I'm sure she was beautiful in her time, but the thing is, so alright, toros locos. Alright, los sureños. Right, the thing is, now that was just somebody writing there messaging about the Mexican or the Latino gangs. I gotta say, you know, I find the culture from a distance, from a safe distance, so like, wow, like intriguing, because I'm learning Spanish and I'm going through a lot of these kind of Latino things. So it helps with my Spanish, and it's like a different world. But I gotta say, from a distance, it seems so cool. The Southsiders, they got all the La M, they got all this stuff going, man. But crazy brutality, man, crazy. I'm not trying to glorify at all. I totally disagree and condemn violence, people, absolutely.
Absolutely, utterly condemn it. Right, so coming back to this, so this is why the people like Imam Qarafi, he argues this concept, and the Malikiya had said that things in that hadith were speaking about a woman in her iddah, the widow who's going through a state of mourning, that she refrains from threading her eyebrows and doing things like this, plucking hair and tattoos and stuff like that. Okay, so I hope that's of some help. So it is permissible in my understanding.